It started like any other political debate until Caroline Leavitt calmly placed a sheet of paper on the desk and turned the entire conversation upside down. What followed wasn't just uncomfortable, it was unforgettable. The camera was already rolling. You could feel it, not through some invisible hum, but in the way the host's smile tightened as she introduced the next segment. Behind the desk, under the studio lights, Caroline Leavitt adjusted her blazer with one hand and set her notepad squarely on the table with the other. Her eyes didn't move from her opponent, Representative Jasmine Crockett. Caroline didn't blink much. When she did, it was deliberate, like punctuation. She wasn't here to play polite politics. The tension had been building quietly throughout the show, each exchange a little sharper than the last. But now, with millions watching live from living rooms in Modesto to Baltimore, things were about to change. Jasmine Crockett leaned back in her seat, crossing one leg over the other, ready to speak again. Her tone was breezy, but her words carried weight. "I think it's pretty clear," she said, "that the American people are tired of being misled. They want leaders who reject corporate influence, who actually represent their districts." She glanced at Caroline as if daring her to respond. The host turned toward Caroline. "Ms. Leavitt, would you like to respond?" Caroline didn't hesitate. "Absolutely," she said, voice even but razor sharp. "That's actually why I'm here." The host leaned slightly forward. Even she knew something was coming. Caroline lifted a single sheet of paper and held it gently between her fingers. "You've said multiple times, Congresswoman Crockett, that you don't accept money from corporate PACs, but according to public records, and I brought them, by the way, you've taken over $370,000 in PAC contributions." Jasmine shifted slightly. Her expression didn't crack, but her fingers gripped the armrest a little tighter. "Some of these funds came from organizations with deep ties to big pharma, tech lobbies, and major defense contractors," Caroline continued. "So when you say you speak for the people, are you talking about your voters or your donors?" The room went quiet. Crockett smirked, clearly caught off guard. "That's a misleading framing," she said quickly. "PAC money isn't the same as corporate donations, and you know that." "But the people watching this right now," Caroline said, leaning in just slightly, "they don't care about technicalities. They care that you said one thing and did another. You said you rejected PAC money. You didn't." The host tried to shift gears. "Let's talk about policy." Caroline cut in, voice still calm. "No, let's talk about trust. If a public servant says they won't take that kind of money and then does it anyway, how are voters supposed to believe anything else they say?" Crockett tried to keep her tone measured. "This is all smoke, distraction. We're talking about real problems in America, and Caroline wants to pick through line items and trip receipts like we're on a game show." Caroline tilted her head slightly. "Transparency isn't a game, Congresswoman. You built your brand on being a straight shooter. I'm just asking, who are you shooting straight with? Because it doesn't look like it's your constituents." The host was silent. The producers didn't cut to commercial. The studio audience didn't clap or gasp. It wasn't that kind of show. But at home, on phones and laptops and smart TVs, people were already hitting record. But this wasn't even the hardest blow yet, because Caroline had more, much more. Jasmine Crockett adjusted the microphone clipped to her lapel. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Caroline's last line had landed harder than she'd expected, and now she was watching every move. Caroline, though, wasn't finished. She tapped her pen against the paper, waiting a beat before continuing. She wanted the moment to breathe, to sit heavy in the air. "You mentioned real problems in America," Caroline said, her voice smooth. "You're right, people can't afford groceries. Their rent keeps going up. Small businesses are struggling to compete against giant corporations. But while you were pledging to fight for them, you were cashing checks from the people causing those problems." She turned slightly toward the cameras. "Let's be specific." Her tone changed, not louder, just sharper, like a parent listing what they found in a kid's backpack. "10,000 from the American Hospital Association," she began. "Another 5,000 from the defense industry PAC linked to military contracting firms. $7,500 from a group that's lobbied against independent pharmacies." Crockett leaned forward now. "You're cherry picking. That's how the system works. Everyone, Republican or Democrat, gets PAC support. It doesn't mean you're owned by them. Carolyn raised an eyebrow. It means you're not who you say you are. A pause. That's what this is about. Not just the money, it's the mismatch between the image you've sold and the reality you live in. Crockett gave a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. This is rich coming from a Trump loyalist. Caroline didn't flinch. I've never pretended to be something I'm not. You, on the other hand, have made a career out of being anti-establishment while swimming in establishment money. You want to talk about hypocrisy? Let's talk. The host leaned in now, eyes wide, glancing toward the production booth. The floor manager made a subtle gesture, stretched the segment. Viewers were clearly glued. Caroline glanced down at her notepad. I don't blame voters for believing you. You're charismatic. You speak with conviction. But that trust matters. When someone tells the public, I don't take PAC money, and then turns around and accepts hundreds of thousands from them, it's not a mistake. It's calculated. Jasmine's jaw was tight now. If you knew anything about campaign finance, you'd know this is how elections are funded. I don't take money directly from corporations. Carolyn interrupted. No one said you did, but that's not what you told the public. You said no PAC money. It wasn't vague, it wasn't complicated. It was a promise. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension didn't need sound. It was clear on Jasmine's face, in the way she didn't jump in with another comeback. And then Caroline delivered the line that would be quoted for days. You can't call yourself a reformer when you're playing by the same rules you say you want to change. That was it. The moment that lit up timelines, group chats, cable panels. A staffer back at Caroline's office in Manchester was already answering calls. Her social media had doubled in activity. The clip would be trimmed and trending within the hour. Jasmine Crockett leaned back slowly. Her smile had vanished. She was calculating now what to say, how to redirect. But the air had shifted. But Caroline hadn't even touched on the Qatar trip yet, and that one had teeth. Caroline could tell the room was watching Jasmine differently now. The confident posturing was still there, but the foundation had cracked. And that's when Caroline leaned back just slightly and gave a half smile. Not smug, just prepared. There's one more thing I've been meaning to ask you, she said almost casually, flipping a page on her notepad. Do you remember your trip to Qatar? Jasmine's expression didn't move right away. She blinked once, maybe twice. Yeah, I do, she said. It was part of a congressional delegation. Caroline nodded slowly. Right. Paid for by the U.S. Qatar Business Council, correct? Roughly $17,500 for the trip? Yeah, Jasmine replied, her tone suddenly tighter. It was an educational trip. Legislators do that all the time. Sure, Caroline said. But the timing was interesting, and so were the optics. The host glanced at her notes but stayed quiet. The producers weren't breaking in. This wasn't something they wanted to cut away from. Caroline lifted another paper. This council, it's known for close ties to the Qatari government. You know, the one accused of funding operations that support Hamas? Her voice didn't change pitch, but the weight of the accusation made everyone sit a little straighter. Crockett opened her mouth, but Caroline kept going. I'm not saying you went there with bad intentions, but while Americans were still reeling from the headlines, while families were holding funerals for victims of terrorist attacks, one of their elected representatives was enjoying a luxury trip overseas, funded by an entity linked to a government under serious international scrutiny. Jasmine's defense came quick, maybe too quick. I went there to learn about diplomacy in the region. I met with officials, military advisors. It wasn't a vacation. No one said it was, Caroline said, but it was paid for by people who had their own agenda. And when you take money from those kinds of groups, whether it's PACs or foreign councils, it raises a simple question. Who are you really accountable to? Jasmine frowned. That's a cheap shot. It's not, Caroline replied, locking eyes. It's a real question, because it's hard to claim moral authority when you're flying business class on a trip sponsored by people trying to influence U.S. policy. For the first time, Crockett seemed to falter. Her words slowed. I didn't know about all that when I went. That's fair, Caroline said. But you do now, so have you returned the money? Silence. The question just hung there. Not shouted, not dramatic, just planted like a nail in the table between them. Jasmine's lips parted, then closed again. She glanced at the host, at the camera, then back at Caroline. "I haven't," she finally said. Caroline nodded once, like a teacher confirming the final piece of a lesson. "So you're asking people to believe you're different, that you don't play the same political games, but you're literally taking the same flights, funded by the same players, to the same places." Jasmine leaned forward again, this time not to argue but to contain the damage. "I stand by my record. I fight for working people. I take meetings across the world to strengthen our policy." Carolyn interrupted again, quiet and calm. "You're not wrong for wanting to learn. You're wrong for pretending you're not benefiting from the very system you criticize. You took the trip, accepted the funds, and never mentioned the sponsors to your constituents. That's not transparency, though. That's omission." The air thickened with silence. The host finally looked toward the production booth, but the signal came back clear. "Let it ride." Caroline gently closed her folder. "It's not personal," she said. "It's public trust. That's what this is about." But Caroline wasn't done. There was one more moment, the one that would send shockwaves beyond politics. Caroline didn't speak right away. The room was already charged, but this time it wasn't just about campaign finance or overseas trips. It was about character, public decency, the kind of moment that leaves a permanent mark, especially when it's caught on camera. She looked at Jasmine with a strange softness, almost like she didn't want to say what came next, but she did. "There's something else I want to ask you, Congresswoman," Carolyn said, "and I want you to really think before you answer." Jasmine's eyes narrowed slightly. She was on edge now. "You called Governor Greg Abbott Governor Hot Wheels on social media. Do you remember that?" Jasmine didn't flinch. "Yes, I said it," she answered bluntly. "You said it," Caroline repeated, nodding slowly. "And it wasn't a slip. It was a fully composed, edited post, mocking a man in a wheelchair because you disagreed with his policies." Jasmine held up a hand. "That comment was made out of frustration during a heated moment. I've been attacked constantly online. I was venting." Caroline didn't raise her voice. "A lot of us are under pressure, but that's not an excuse to target someone's disability." Jasmine shifted again. "Greg Abbott has made policies that harm people. If he wants to play tough, he should expect pushback." Carolyn stayed still. "Pushback is fine, but mocking someone's disability? That crosses a line." There was a flicker in Jasmine's expression, something in between defiance and discomfort. "People joke all the time on Twitter," she said. "It's a platform built on sarcasm. You've been sarcastic too." Caroline leaned forward, just enough to close the space. "There's a difference between sarcasm and cruelty. When a public figure insults someone's appearance, gender, or health condition, especially a physical disability, it stops being a joke. It becomes a reflection of who they are." Jasmine didn't answer right away. She sat back in her chair, jaw set, but eyes flickering toward the floor. Caroline's tone softened slightly. "Millions of Americans use wheelchairs. They live with challenges most of us don't understand. They're veterans, mothers, kids, and when someone in Congress turns them into a punchline, they feel smaller. It tells them they're worth less." The studio had never been this quiet. Even the crew behind the cameras had stopped shifting. Jasmine sighed. "Look, I don't hate people with disabilities. I have people in my own family who—" Caroline interrupted again gently. "It's not about hate. It's about responsibility. You represent people. All people. That comes with weight. Words don't just echo. They land." A pause, just to air between them. "Have you apologized to Governor Abbott?" Carolyn asked. Jasmine shook her head. "No, would you?" "I'd consider it," she said, "but I'm not going to be bullied into some fake moment for television." Caroline didn't push. She just nodded once. "You don't owe me anything," she said, "but the people watching, they're listening. They're deciding what kind of behavior they're willing to accept from leaders." Jasmine tried to pivot. "Let's not pretend Republicans haven't said worse." Caroline didn't blink. "Some have, and I've condemned Them too. This isn't about party. This is about human decency. The host leaned forward again. We're running short on time. Any final thoughts before we close? Caroline looked directly into the camera. If we want to change politics, we need to stop making excuses. We all mess up. But when we do, we own it. That's what leadership looks like. The host nodded and turned to Jasmine. Congresswoman? Jasmine's face was unreadable. I've said what I came here to say. But viewers at home had already decided. The moment had left an imprint. And not just because it went viral, but behind the scenes, things were just starting to boil. Phones were ringing, headlines were being written, and public opinion? It was shifting fast. By the time the credits started rolling, the internet had already taken over. In a small newsroom office in San Antonio, a junior editor sat hunched over his desk, cutting the segment into a 90-second clip. He didn't need approval. It was obvious this one would spread like wildfire. The title? Caroline Leavitt checks Jasmine Crockett on live TV. Within 15 minutes, it was trending on X. In Fort Lauderdale, a group of political podcasters were watching the episode live. They cut their usual recap short and hit record. Hold on, one said, spinning his mic. We just witnessed a real-time meltdown. And Leavitt didn't even raise her voice. The reaction wasn't just fast, it was emotional. Some were cheering, some were stunned, and others, even those who didn't always agree with Caroline's politics, were reluctantly impressed. The comments piled up fast. She came with facts and receipts. This wasn't bullying, it was accountability. Crockett didn't just lose the argument, she lost control of the room. On Facebook, the moment had already been clipped and reshared across political pages. Seniors in Spokane were texting the link to their kids. A single dad in Tampa replayed it during his lunch break. Teachers in Omaha shared it with side comments like, "Say what you want, this girl was prepared." Meanwhile, Crockett's staff was silent. Interns sat at desks, watching notifications flood in. The group text for her team was muted, which was never a good sign. In her private office, Jasmine sat scrolling. She saw the clip of herself pausing mid-sentence after Caroline's question about returning the Qatar money. The way the camera stayed on her face. She looked cornered. Aide after aide suggested tweeting a clarification, a statement, something. But everything sounded defensive. What if we don't say anything? One staffer asked. Let it pass. Jasmine looked up, voice low. It's not going to pass. Back in Manchester, Caroline was already debriefing with her team. Her press advisor was grinning like someone who knew a good moment when she saw one. That was a home run, she said. No yelling, no gloating, just truth. Caroline didn't smile back. Not yet. It's not about beating her, she said. It's about making sure people see through the act. And they did. On YouTube, independent commentators started weighing in. A moderate commentator out of Tucson said what many were thinking. Look, I don't care what side you're on. Caroline showed up. She brought facts. She stayed calm. That's leadership. But not everyone was celebrating. Some viewers defended Jasmine. She's passionate. She's fighting the system, one post read. They're just ganging up on her. Others called the exchange unfair. This was an ambush, a political blogger from the Bay Area wrote. It was clearly staged to make her look bad. Still, the numbers didn't lie. Caroline's follower count surged. Her email list tripled overnight. She was invited to 3 major podcasts and a late-night news panel. Even hosts who didn't typically welcome her politics were intrigued. Meanwhile, Jasmine's team finally released a tweet, short, vague, and already too late. It read, "Passion can sometimes come out strong, but I'll never apologize for standing up to performative politics." It didn't land. In fact, the replies were merciless. This wasn't passion. It was a train wreck. Standing up? You didn't stand up to anything, you froze. You owed disabled Americans an apology, not an excuse. The story had moved past spin. Now it was about perception, and perception had already taken root. Caroline didn't call for anyone's resignation. She didn't even gloat online. She just let the moment live. And it did. But what came next wasn't just online backlash. It was the start of real consequences. Behind the scenes, in meetings, and in halls of power, Jasmine used to walk with confidence. The next morning, Capitol Hill was unusually quiet. at least around Jasmine Crockett's office. Inside room 205, the blinds were drawn, the phones were ringing, and her chief of staff stood by the window, not saying much. Jasmine sat behind her desk, reading an email she'd already seen 3 times. It was from a donor in Indianapolis, someone who'd maxed out twice in the last cycle. It was short. Not sure where you stand anymore. We're going to sit this one out. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. She just closed the laptop and looked at the whiteboard behind her. Her team had mapped out a 6-month plan for a national push, speaking events, a rebranding effort, campaign visits through the Midwest. Now the board just looked like scribbles. Across the hall, her communications director was rewriting her public statement for the 4th time. They'd pulled the previous one after a few reporters privately called it non-committal, and one local radio station flat out said it reeked of panic. This wasn't just about a bad night on TV anymore. It was about control, what she'd lost and what she was scrambling to regain. Meanwhile, Caroline was already on the move. In a hotel lobby in Phoenix, she shook hands with a local business owner, posed for a photo, then took a call from her media team. They just confirmed another primetime interview. Her press secretary was giddy. They're framing it as a leadership moment. You'll be sitting across from a progressive host. Expect heat. Caroline just nodded. Good, let them bring it. She wasn't celebrating. Not really. She understood how fast things could turn in politics. But this time felt different. The public hadn't just watched her challenge someone. They had watched someone unravel in real time. In Austin, a veteran political strategist named Ronaldo Green was watching the clip for the 5th time. He wasn't partisan. He'd worked for both sides over the years. But he knew political instincts when he saw them. She didn't just hit the weak spots, he told a colleague. She found the holes Jasmine didn't even know were there. The colleague raised an eyebrow. Think it's over for Crockett? Ronaldo gave a slow shake of the head. Not overnight, but her shine's fading. She built her image on moral clarity, and now that image is cracked. People don't forget cracks. The ripple effect was already starting. Jasmine's scheduled appearance at a youth political summit in Kansas City? Canceled. Quietly. A roundtable she was meant to moderate on inclusive leadership in Des Moines? Postponed. No explanation given. And in Dallas, a small group of community leaders were having a very different conversation. She's lost touch, one of them said. We believed her. We defended her. Now we're sitting here trying to justify a trip to Qatar and a joke about someone in a wheelchair. We can't do that. Meanwhile, back in Washington, her political rivals were circling. One lesser-known candidate from her district had already released a new campaign video. No attack ads, just a tight 60-second clip of himself talking about trust and accountability. It ended with a simple line. We don't need showmanship. We need truth. The subtext was clear. And Jasmine? She was still sitting at that desk trying to think several moves ahead, but realizing the board had changed. The press requests had slowed. Her publicist stopped forwarding the nastier headlines. One reporter had reached out to ask, do you regret the Hot Wheels comment now that it's followed you into policy hearings? She hadn't answered. But inside her own office, the answer was showing up in smaller, quieter ways. Hesitant staffers, quieter hallways, donors going cold, supporters hesitating before speaking her name. Caroline didn't need to press the attack anymore. She'd already done what most political operatives spend years trying to do. She hadn't just won the argument, she had changed the narrative. But before we close, there's a bigger question worth asking, one that goes beyond Jasmine and Caroline. The headlines eventually moved on. That's how the media works. Fast in, fast out. But something about that debate stayed with people. Not because it was flashy, not because someone shouted, but because it peeled something open that folks had been feeling for a while and didn't quite know how to name. Trust. That's what it came down to. Across the country in places like Flagstaff, Mobile, and Springfield, people gathered around dinner tables in barbershops or over coffee in small diners, talking about what they'd seen on that show. Not necessarily about Caroline Leavitt or Jasmine Crockett by name, but about what the moment revealed. One man, a mechanic in Toledo, said it best to a local reporter. I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. Just tell the truth. Don't stand in front of a camera saying you're one thing and then turn around and do the exact opposite. We're not dumb. That moment where Caroline sat across from Jasmine and calmly laid out fact after fact didn't just resonate because it was a political win. It hit because it felt real, unfiltered, like watching someone finally call out a kind of polished dishonesty that had become too normal in public life. Caroline never claimed to be perfect. She wasn't trying to impress anyone with slogans or performance. She just did the one thing that people rarely expect anymore. She showed up prepared, told the truth, and stood her ground. And Jasmine, she didn't just lose control of the room, she lost the benefit of the doubt. Because in politics, especially these days, when the mask slips even once, people remember. But maybe this moment was never really about Jasmine. Maybe it was about a bigger shift happening across the country, a quiet demand for something different, for accountability that doesn't need theatrics, for leaders who know that trust is earned slowly and lost instantly. There was a time when politicians could count on a distracted public. Not anymore, FOMO. People watch, they fact-check, they rewind the clips, and when something doesn't sit right, they don't forget. Caroline's story isn't just about a viral debate. It's about what happens when someone challenges the comfort of fake narratives, without yelling, without spinning, and without walking on eggshells. Maybe that's the lesson here. That real strength doesn't need a spotlight. It shows up, speaks plainly, and doesn't flinch when the camera rolls. As for Jasmine, only time will tell if she recovers. Voters are forgiving, but only if they believe the apology is real. And to this day, she still hasn't said the words people needed to hear. What this moment reminds us is simple, but powerful. Character counts. Words matter. And in a world full of noise, people are craving clarity more than ever. So if you're watching this and wondering what to take away, ask yourself this. When you speak, when you lead, when you show up, will people believe you? Or will they remember the silence that followed your contradiction? And if this story made you stop and think, even for a second, consider subscribing to the channel. We break things down the way they actually happen, and we don't sugarcoat what matters. Because truth, no matter who it makes uncomfortable, always deserves a seat at the table.